cloud. So, hello, good evening to you, good afternoon to me. I am so excited to be sitting here with you, the director, Sonita, for the film Hostel. We are screening this as part of our RoxFilm at Home series, and I just want folks to know that this year it's been really interesting. We have sold more online passes than we have in-person passes. And I think that that's wonderful. We curated this online program to really be its separate, dependent sort of mini film festival, knowing who our audience is. So we're excited that they're here with us, that they've seen your film. And I have so many questions for you, but we're gonna try to get through this in a half an hour. So I know you're asked this question all the time, but I do think it's an important question, and that is that this film started out as a personal journey. And oftentimes with documentary filmmakers, this happens, right? You write about something that you want to bring to the forefront, that you've learned about through some way. It's a personal journey, but then it becomes something else. Can you just talk a little bit about how this personal journey sort of catapulted you into this larger thing, amazing film called Hostel?
Oh, thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that. I guess I'm a second generation British Asian. My parents are from India. My parents were born in India, both parents, and both of them were subject to partition of India and Pakistan. So when 1947 happened, they were both uprooted. My mom lived in what was old India, Lahore. My dad lived in what is now New India anyway, but she was the one that had to walk for 16 days across from old India to new India to resettle. So she became a refugee immediately within her own country. My father was also displaced within his country, both residing in mud huts, and became broke and penniless before they made their journey to England in the 50s. So I grew up around that story. I grew up around that struggle. And I think knowing that struggle and that story all of my life led me really to the point of being 45 years old. That was 2 years ago, and embarking on my debut film as a director. And I guess the pandemic really thrusted that narrative to the forefront, my childhood. All of a sudden, I saw the immense need of migrant communities in our country, Black and Asian, working class communities also coming to the forefront to help people. And those were the communities I grew up in. And it was at that point, I remembered my parents, they came to the UK and they ran a convenience store, and they were the hub of the community. So I started to think, well, what would have happened now if the pandemic had struck then when I was a child? And I may have been the child relying on the food bank. They may have been the couple that would have lost their business. And we may have been that family that would have been destitute. And I just kept thinking about that. And because of that, I wanted to go out onto the street during the pandemic, right at the start of the pandemic. And originally I was making a completely different film, but I started to make a film about migrant communities. I was basically looking for my mum and dad. I think in a sense, I was looking for my family, and I was trying to reconnect to my history so deeply. And that's when I found my participants. And it was an amazing journey and a deeply reflective one for me.
And it's true. I mean, I love that, trying to find my family. And you did. You found your family in each one of these folks that you ended up, highlighting in the documentary. There is your family in all of them. And for all of us, people of color around the world, if you're in a different place, that's all of our stories. And that's why when I had said to you that this is a universal story. This is, we're facing this everywhere. But I wanted to, before I talk about that, because I do want to talk about the very connected story with the United States and immigration and migrants, but the fact that you did find your own story in this must have been difficult. Like, how did you manage creating this documentary, getting these stories, this transition, from going from here, this is my story, but I have to tell their story in a very authentic way and not get so caught up and emotionally caught up in it? That had to be difficult.
It was extremely difficult. I think the more I filmed, the more I got into the narrative of the story that I was unraveling. the more difficult it became. But then there was a point that I had to become objective. I still had that deep level of empathy for my participants, but I had to become objective as the filmmaker. And for me, their unfolding narrative in front of the camera was so important. This was their story. They already have a voice. I don't believe I was the filmmaker that gave them the voice. They had their voices. I was a portal that was putting that voice on screen for them. So at that moment, it struck me that actually I just became part of them, and we were just working together collaboratively to get that story out there. And so the emotion was strong to begin with, but then it became an impactful film. It became a film that not only myself felt impacted by, but there was a sense of urgency. We're in a global pandemic. Myself and my crew are telling this story about the hostile environment, and we're in a hostile environment in the global pandemic. And then all of a sudden, our participants are on the brink of destitution, on the brink of homelessness, on the brink of losing their visas, their organizations. Everything became about urgency. So there needed to be a lot of calmness around us. At the same time, we needed to have clarity, but we just needed to remain objective, sympathetic, empathetic, but at the same time have our goals and ambition to deliver this film to the wider audiences so that people knew what was actually happening within our country. And that all happened during that 18-month period from March 2020 to September, 2021. It was just all happening at that time, and it just continued to happen, which was just an incredible journey.
I mean, yes, and isn't it amazing how, and we see this through the archival footage, which was wonderful, and the way that you sort of brought that full circle and brought it to present day, but how a pandemic, how something like that can just shift people's lives in a nanosecond. So here we had the pandemic, and then we had Black Lives Matter, and then all of a sudden, like you talk about in the film, once people start thinking about a majority minority, and then thinking just like apartheid in South Africa, that it's you're the problem. We don't have food. We don't have now gas. Interest rates and housing are going up. So it must be the migrants' problem. If we get rid of them, then we can solve all of our problems. And that footage in the documentary with Make Britain White Again, I was like, oh, this is, here we all are in the United States. So, I mean, I do want to talk a little bit about that, because there are these big similarities. And I want to know, during COVID, a lot of that happened here as well. This whole the increase in white supremacy, and all of that movement pushing towards this. There was this policy a long time ago, but now we see from your documentary that it's gotten worse. So
absolutely.
Can you talk about that, maybe that connection, and did that have any bearing or impact on the film?
I guess there were so many universal themes in this film, right? So we have this divide and rule, and our history tells us that we divide and separate people, and we set populations against each other. Then there's going to be this animosity, and with animosity grows resentment. Within resentment, that a lot of other stuff comes out, right? And then that's how politicians win votes. That's how they win voices. It's like, let's set populations against each other, and then all of a sudden we're the vote winner because we're the majority. So with us, it was in the immediate future was Brexit. Brexit was the campaign that told us that actually, the migrant is taking our job. The migrant is sponging off our system. The migrant is taking our healthcare service. Blame the migrant, blame the migrant. And that was the reason why we had such a successful Brexit vote, because everyone felt at that point that they were so crushed already that if the migrant is here stealing their work and their jobs and their money and their income, we just got to get rid of them. So that was the impetus for the Brexit vote. As I was filming Hostile, I also realized that this didn't just happen right now. There was a history of hostility in our country. And that's when I started researching my legislation, taking me back to the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. But then I started thinking about empire and colonization, and the fact that British Empire was responsible for colonizing so many countries around the world and leaving their mark. And you think about slavery, and you think about the history of India and what happened there. And that's why I had to put this story in the film. And then you think about the universality of this story. You think about what's happening in France, in Germany, in America, where we've got the rise of the right and the rise of white supremacy. Yes. And it becomes worrying that we start thinking, actually what's happening in our country is happening in the borders of Mexico and America. It's happening in France, where they're telling migrants not to come anymore. It's happening in parts all over Europe, where we're seeing the rise of the right, in Hungary. And it's worrying times, not only in America, but in Brazil, in Europe. And I think those common themes are the same. It's about legislation, it's about policy, and it's around the narrative of divide and rule. And it's around the narrative, keep migrants out of our country, keep our country white. And I think this is why we had to put this story out there, to show that it's happening here, and for people to feel around the world that actually it's not just happening to them, it's happening everywhere. And I think that's what we've mainly come across with showing our film, is that how many people from across Europe have felt it's happening to them, how many people in South America, it's happening to them, how many people in America that have come to our screenings, it's happening to us, it's not just happening to you. So yeah, I think there could be many hostiles made across the world, unfortunately. And I think the more we raise awareness, the more we put this story out there, the more impact we can have, for sure.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because one of the things about your film is it's an activist film as well, right? It's sort of like what we, what I always say too, like all your politics are local, right? I mean, the things that happen to you within your community, small, and then it gets larger, and then it gets larger, and then it's US policy, but a lot of that happens in the local politics of your space. And if you're not connected to that, then laws and things are going to change because you're not paying attention, and we're not paying attention. And I feel like your film, it's, there could be 100 hostels made, but I would rather have this hostel going to all of these other places to have people say, I see myself in this, and what do I do? What's my next step? I mean, you made an interesting point, about this film, when you said, I wouldn't have made this film if I didn't believe that the system can be improved. Do you believe
Absolutely.
that? Because I'm getting jaded, and because like you talk about, it's happening all over the world, and how are we letting this happen? So how do you see it being improved?
Well, I don't know whether you know, but in our country last night, there should have been a flight that left to Rwanda. And on that Rwanda flight, there should have been 15 people that had been detained, that had come here from crossing the water as refugees, seeking asylum, leaving precarious situations, and they were going to be deported to Rwanda and to seek asylum there. It's been something that the government has been working on for the last couple of months. That flight did not take off because the organizations that are working tirelessly against the hostile environment managed to stop that flight from happening, and they saved the people that were on that plane. So I luckily met Rishi Sunak, our Chancellor, a couple of months ago, and I spoke to him about my film, and I spoke to him about the threads and the themes within the film, and I highlighted to him the issues. And I do believe that this current arrangement is not going to be here forever. Governments change, leaders change, and with that becomes hope. We have to keep pushing, because if we stop, then what will happen? We give up. We don't change the language. Language is a gateway to an attitude. Well, let's change the language. And that's what we're doing. We're saying, this is happening. We're highlighting the issues, and these are the reasons why it needs to stop and it needs to change. So I feel like I am hopeful. I am hopeful because I have been on a Q&A tour since January. I've met the public that have been suffering. I've met organizations that are working. I've met politicians, and those that are working hard are working damn hard to stop it from happening. So we need to be supporting them and increasing the awareness, with the hope in the future that we have arrangements and governments that are sympathetic to this hostile environment, which I'm hoping in the future we will. So I am hopeful. I really am hopeful.
That is so wonderful to hear. And I do think that, using film as a medium, as sort of a catalyst for conversation is really, really important. And I think that we are a media environment. That's how we consume stories every single day, more so in mainstream media and other media, on YouTube, on whatever. And I just feel like it is the perfect way to help get this message across and to have people share it and talk about it. So I applaud you for making this film. And then I want to talk about this being your first film, which is just blows me away because it's just so incredible. But I do want to talk about two things that aren't necessarily politically connected, but I do want to talk about the tone of this film that we kind of saw in it is a sort of like, not dark, but it was like this horror feel. And in your cinematic style, the way you edit it, the music you used, which was just beautiful throughout the whole thread, really bringing us on the sort of lyrical journey of these characters in your film. So can you talk about that conscious choice of using that tone and music throughout?
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned a lot about myself as a human being making this film. One, that I'm extremely into detail. You know, I watch everything, I look at everything, but also making a film to me is a feeling. It's visceral, it's an emotion. It comes from somewhere, you know. And the way I dealt with this film and worked with this film, I used that emotion a lot. When I was on set and I was filming the unraveling story, there was a high emotion, a high intensity on set. And there was also a sense of urgency, as I discussed earlier. And so with my shots, some of the shots are static shots where I hold on my participants, because at that moment, that emotion is so gripping, it's so revealing, and it's so intense that their eyes speak words that you and I do not know what they're saying, but you know their eyes speak words. Their body language speaks words, and you and I will never know what they're saying, but it speaks words. And I felt that with all of my participants, that the words were bigger than what were coming out of their mouths. It was an energy. It was all around us at the time whilst filming Hostile. So I had to tune into that as the director. I was making and creating a very important film. And so I had to step into that I had to do this justice, and I had to deliver it in a way that showed that level of urgency and importance. And so I went with that. And in terms of how I kind of, when I edited it, I wanted to keep those shots in the film. I wanted to keep that intensity up. And then that was coupled with the music. I mean, you know, I was so fortunate to interview Nitin Sawhney, who was just an interviewee to begin with, because of his history with migration, similar to my parents, and the fact that he's made music around the immigrant story. And it was only when I met him that I asked him, can I use your music in my film? And it was then that I got into his music, which deeply connects to the migrant story, with the sets of instruments that he uses, but also the vocals, which are just take you on a journey, you know. And he introduced me to Ayana Witter-Johnson, that tells the Black story. Nitin tells the brown story. Then you've got George the poet, that's spoken word. Yes. You know, when you think of rap and you think of poetry and you think of spoken words, it's lyrical. So it's a dance. I wanted to create this emotive, intense story, but at the same time give the viewer escapism in music and lyrics and a dance, to portray the energy of the film, that we need to do something about this, and there's an urgency, but we also need to think about how we're going to deliver this to the public. And I think it was just that, it was that kind of moment where everything was kind of aligning. The stars aligned with everything in the film. And I think they continue to do so. And so, yeah, I appreciate you picking up on that, but definitely wanted that horror feel. I mean, you know, Eugene Jarecki was always an inspiration to me, The House I Live In. When I watched that film, there was an urgency and very important issues. He was the war on drugs, mine's the war on hostility. So I think there was 2 wars going on here, you know, and I think that was my war, the war on hostile and the hostile environment. So it's a real war, the war on people.
It is.
So that intensity was there for me always, and continues to be so in screenings. I watch the film, I sit with my audience,
I know.
and I'm horrified by it. I'm like, I'm so upset and angry when I see it. And those shots take me somewhere. Those shots take me to a place where I'm thinking about their emotion and what they're feeling. And I wanted audience to feel that with them and with me. So that's why I did that.
And you do feel it. Like I said before, that I watched it again and I was getting angrier. And then, you know, and just so people know, like I had sent Sonita like this whole list of questions that I wanted to answer. And as I'm watching the film again, I wrote a whole nother 20 of them, thinking, you know, I wish we had time to just like talk about this. So so thank you for that. I did. You can tell it's intentional. You can tell the journey you want to take us on. I think it's, you know, beautifully, you know, edited, and the music and everything. So, you know, it's there were so many questions, even just about like this is such a harsh policy. This hostile environment policy is,
Yeah.
we don't have anything that harsh in the US, although not, I shouldn't say that. We could easily have, we are having voting issues with voting rights and gerrymandering and changing. So, you know, people of color can't vote. And I just had a quick question about who, if everyone's who's a migrant isn't allowed to stay, then how are people allowed to stay? Like, how is someone able to be part of parliament? Isn't that person also a migrant? Because, you know, your character was talking about how their kids, even though they're born in Britain, still aren't considered British citizens. Where here you are. If you're born here, you're you're a US citizen.
Yeah. I mean, it's,
So
at that part of the film, I only discovered when making the film. I was horrified that,
wow.
you know, you couldn't even get citizenship for your child. So so we have this system here, which is limits the rights of those here and limits the rights of those coming here. Those coming here, asylum seeker, refugees. We've just had a policy put in place, which is now an act of law, which is called the Nationality and Borders Bill, that criminalizes people that are seeking asylum and refuge in our country, makes them criminals. That's why they're trying to send them to Rwanda. For those that are coming here legally and lawfully, oh, fine, they're here working, paying their taxes, paying their national insurance, being citizens within our country. But they have this thing called applications, payments, visas, restricting them. You know, every 2.5 years, one of my participants has to pay $2,500 every 2.5 years to renew his visa. And he's been trying that for nearly 10 years now. He spent a lot of money for him and the other 3 members of his family, only to be told that you're still on this limited leave to remain, which does not give you the rights really to stay here long term. So they want to keep you in this loop. They want to keep you in this system.
Well, they
because
make money.
you keep paying.
You keep paying.
Yes,
Can't even imagine.
paying.
I was going to ask you that question too. Where does this money go? Because that's a lot of people paying money into the
Absolutely.
British government.
Yeah.
What?
It goes into the Home Office. The Home Office is actually a business within itself. It's not connected to the Treasury. And in 2018, we got figures that the Home Office made £500 million out of this business. It's a business to them, and it's a very lucrative business. And I think that they are doing it just because of that. Immigrants are cash cows, and they are, you know, people think they're here stealing our jobs. They're just not. They are here either broke, penniless, and surviving off nothing and forced into destitution, or they're here working, tax paying, and still being forced into destitution because they have to pay so much out. They also have to pay an NHS surcharge. So effectively, they have to pay insurance to use our health service, even though they are paying their taxes. So you're screwed either way. So it's just revealing this story is horrifying in a way, because you just can't believe it's happening in your own country. And as you saw in our film, one of the participants was subject to the Windrush scandal, which was those that came here legally, lawfully, post the Second World War, thought they had a British passport, only to be told decades later that their identity, their landing cards that proved that they were here had been destroyed, that they didn't have a passport, so therefore they can be sent home, detained and deported, and they're here illegally and unlawfully. And so that was all in our film. And I think what I learned from this film is one day you could be legal and lawful, the next day illegal and unlawful, just because of a minor discrepancy on your form.
Right. Just because of a change that they decided to make.
Exactly.
Or in Congress. Yeah. So it's like all of a sudden one day. And that's what I was going to say, is that's the scary thing. That came across so strongly in your film, is this fear of walking down the street one day and being swooped up. I mean, it's crazy. And it's and I'm hoping for a brighter future, that people understand and use this film to say, this is crazy. Like, we can't let this happen in our country. We need to help Britain get through this ridiculousness, because, you know, you're right. People have been there 53 years. He was there. Now, quickly, I know we don't have much time, but I don't know if you can just do a quick update. You shared that with me on your participants, and how long has it been? I mean, I know you just wrapped this film. It was at 2021 or 2022?
So we wrapped in 2021. It then went on to the festival circuit in October 2021, and then it was released in the cinema January 2022.
Okay.
So we've been in cinemas basically since January 2022.
Yeah.
So a lot has happened in that time. I think, first of all, with our participant Farouk, he applied for indefinite leave to remain. And again, it was refused, revoked, and they didn't even want to look at the application this time. So for him, you know, it's just so frustrating for him and his family of three. And he's so uncertain about his future. Farouk now, unfortunately, has his own health crisis, which I can't really say much about, but if it is what he thinks it is, then I don't know where the future holds for Farouk right now and his family. It's very precarious. With Anthony Bryant, he was offered some compensation, but not at the level that he should have been offered. And he didn't accept it, because if you accept a smaller pot of compensation, they just don't go for the other point. That's it. Unfortunately, in the time of making Hostile and completing it and having it in the cinemas, he's lost his mom, he's lost his son, and he's lost his brother. Oh. So he's lost so many members of his family, which has been horrifying. The students are in an extremely precarious situation. Some of the students have gone home, and some of them are here in a very precarious situation. For Daksha and Paresh, their kitchen closed. They tried so hard to reinstate that kitchen, but they couldn't, and that sent them out of London. They became so depressed that they had to leave London, and they've left London now. But in the meantime, the Queen did award them an MBE for their services to duty, but they were like, we don't want the MBE, they want the kitchen. So I'm in contact with all of my participants, but not the students, because of their situation, and that's why they remained anonymous. And I felt it was respectfully to respect their wishes to let them go and let them be free to deal with this themselves, although I do know the people that are helping them. I've kept in contact with all of our participants, and they've all been on the Q&A tour with me. Great. But I think that the heartbreaking thing of everything with Hostile is that their situation isn't resolved. However, with Farouk now, I had a successful screening on Wednesday night at a law firm, and we've now got him pro bono representation for free for him and his family. So that is now in the works, and that is my mission as the filmmaker, to resolve their situations. And I think it's upsetting that it hasn't moved on as fast as I would like it to have been. However, what that shows is, with the millions of people that are suffering in our country, they're in the same position as them. So that's why we need to get this story out there, to say that this is happening, this is real, and we need to help these people, you know, and that's what we're doing.
That is so inspiring. I actually have chills. That's incredibly inspiring. And I think you're right. I think a film like this is absolutely going to do that, to be able to bring it to those spaces, to say, this is your action. This is what you need to do. You're an activist. This is what you can do. You're a lawyer. This is what you can do. You're a doctor. This is what you can do. So we're running out of time, unfortunately. I do want to touch on sort of like, what's next for you? Did this sort of like spark you to say, I need to be making like lots of movies like this, to be supporting migrant communities, and really telling their stories? And you're right, all of these participants in your film have their own stories, but as a filmmaker, you're elevating their stories, right? And you're bringing them to the forefront, and that's such an important part of their stories. So what is your next story? What is your next step?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd like to continue making films. I would as a director. I'm really drawn to the history of India and the story of film, the story of India, and relate that to the story of film maybe in India, but also the history of India, partition, empire, and how that feeds into the modern day narrative again, you know, in the South Asian community story that resonates throughout the diaspora, throughout the world, but also so heavily resonates within my own country. So I really want to work with an archival film again, but following the narrative of a protagonist that will unravel the story of India with me. And that will again be with a story of an individual, with archive, with music, maybe some dance. You know, I really love the film, you know, Pina. And I'm like, I love that whole idea of bringing movement into a film to portray energy and sound and emotion and music and story. So I'm kind of like, you know, coming up with some ideas. However, I am really committed to this film. You know, I'm still in the cinema. It's got a festival run. We've got some offers for distribution. And I think as a filmmaker, I have to follow through on my commitment. And so I am committed on Hostile to at least until December. So
Nice.
I can't actually go into production into anything until next year. And I want to do that. Not that I need to do it. I want to do it. I have to do it. And this is my journey as a human being, you know, to help, to be part of that program. I have amazing impact partners that have helped me along this journey. Now I'm helping them, MPs, organizations, where they are now screening the film. They're showing the film to people that they know with the hope of raising awareness. So we're all on this journey together. I think for the film also, we are screening at educational institutions.
Yes.
Like I've been to Oxford University, Angela Ruskin University, we're going to London universities also, and Cambridge University. So we're doing an educational rollout and also rollout within schools, and we're doing a legal rollout. So my journey from September to December will be pursuing those rollouts and going into education and law, policy and curriculum. So putting this film on the curriculum so that children and young adults know what's happening within their country, and then putting it with policymakers so that they can think about the policies that they're enacting, so that in the future we could have fairer policies for all. So I'm kind of committed to that, with the hope of making another film in the future, but also producing a couple of projects, one with Geeta Gambhir, who's an amazing filmmaker in the US, and Smriti Mundra, who's also an amazing director in the US. And I've got 2 producing projects with them. So I've got stuff on. I'm just doing that. Yeah, in the time I have, because I'm also a mom. So, you know, that's my priority. Yeah.
You know, I mean, but that's what it takes as someone who is really an activist at heart and wants to tell those stories, that you're going to make room for it. So we greatly appreciate that. We greatly appreciate your film. So incredible. Wish you the best of luck with it. We are here to support your journey in any way. You know, we are here in Boston, the bastion of legal world and activists. And so if there's a way that we can, you know, bring this film back and to be in front of, you know, the law students who do a lot of this immigration work and bringing in crowds of people to do that, we would love to do that, and then to support you in any way, because it really is beautiful and it really is a universal story. So
thank you so much.
We just want to thank you so much for sharing your film, for allowing us to have it be part of the Roxbury International Film Festival. And we will be following you and your folks and making sure that that we are also committed to the work that you're doing around.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you for all your energy and efforts. And thank you to the audience for tuning in and seeing the film. And you can reach us at Hostile Doc and on info@galeforcefilms.co.uk if you have any questions. And, you know, feel free to reach out. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Best of luck.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.